Episode 5 of Penny Dreadful's Sea of Angels, entitled Children of the Royal Sun. To use one of my favorite nouns for this show, aftermath. So the aftermath of what previously happened when Mateo, Fly Rico, and Rio, along with another Zoot Suiter, kills and slaughters Officer Riley because he molested Mateo's younger sister, Josefina. And so what we see simultaneously is a ritualistic kind of inauguration celebration. So after this murder, you see Mateo being, I guess, influenced again by Rio, as he's just in his ear, talking to him, encouraging and telling him what he did was his birthright, based on what the Spaniards did to the indigenous people in Mexico, and kind of just putting that in his head, and this is the result of that, and so forth and so on. So that scene eventually cuts to him being disrobed by Rio, and subsequently in bed with her when Fly Rico comes in, and it looks like he's disturbing the potential intimate act that's going to occur. And Mateo is frightened by that because Rico looks like he's upset. And it turns out that Rico decides he's going to partake in this celebratory threesome. So going back to Josefina, who was molested by Officer Riley, you see her in the presence of Sister Molly at Sister Molly's church, basically comforting Josefina, and through their own experiences that they had with being molested as young women, or in this case, Sister Molly gave her story that she was 10 years old, and the mother did nothing about it, we find out. And so that leads to even more conjecture about who Sister Molly's mother is, who is played by Amy Madigan. And we find soon within the series, after she realizes that Molly had been spending the night with Detective Vega, she goes to Randolph, which is her right-hand man. And basically it's her, what I suspect, again, based on conjecture and based on all the evidence that's pointing to this story plotline, that's her hitman. It's supposed to be her bodyguard and driver that looks after Molly, because the mother doesn't want Molly to stray, because she has her by the string, because that's Amy Madigan's character is Cash Cow. And so what that speculates, not only to me, but if you follow the trails and the crumbs that they're leaving, is that Amy Madigan's character, who plays Sister Molly's mother, is pulling all the strings here and had Hazlitt killed. That's a spoiler alert. That's more of a prediction because it hasn't been presented in the series yet. But she gives a nod to Randolph and tells him basically he should probably take care of Detective Vega. It's not directly told that she wants him killed or hurt, but it's referenced, and there's a subtle nod there. And of course, she's telling Randolph that she's doing God's work and that God's going to bless him for doing what Amy Madigan's character wants him to do. Now, one of the minor problems that I see, and it's not much of an issue with in terms of the context of the storytelling or the production, is that there are so many subplots going on within this series, is that a lot of things take a back seat. Like the whole premise of the show, well, at least one of the main premises was how they're going to bull down Belvedere Heights to put in the Pasadena Arroyo Seco Highway. And the person behind that, as we know, is Councilman Townsend, who we found out in the last episode is a closeted homosexual. And so what we see in this episode is kind of basically touch more on his sexual proclivities rather than the storyline of knocking down the homes. And we see him kind of being Mr. Twinkle Toes and dancing in this elaborate, beautiful home that he's waiting for Kurt, the Nazi driver Gestapo, who's actually an American, who is there, put there by Alex to indulge him in his sexual activities, but at the same time filming him so they can blackmail him at a later time. Of course, another character that has secrets in his closet, so to speak, is the pediatrician Peter Kraft, who is a Nazi sympathizer and a member of the Bund. And as we know, Magda, also known as Alex, as well as Elsa in this case. Elsa, the German immigrant who claims to be a battered woman trying to get and tug at Peter Kraft's heartstrings. So again, Magda, posing as Elsa, goes to this local dance club. And you gotta remember, during this era, there were what's called taxi dancers, where women would go and basically sit all dolled up, waiting for men to pay them. I guess at the time it was pay them 10 cents to dance and try to get to know them. Many women just use this as an opportunity for additional income. So she poses as a dancer, but she has her purpose for this. Being that Elsa is Magda, she's eyeballing to find somebody to basically entangle in her schemes. And so she takes the man home, the home that she supposedly lives with her husband, who we never see and obviously doesn't exist, and slaughters them in almost a ritualistic kind of sacrifice. Because throughout this whole series, especially with this last episode, they're talking about sacrifice and paying homage to the gods and so forth. And again, she sacrifices this stranger and cuts his throat open, has him laid out in her living room as she's calling Peter Kraft for help, playing the hopeless immigrant that I need help, when very well she did that purposely to bring in Peter Kraft into her fold and basically hang something over his head so that he has to do her bidding. And so as they're burying this stranger, it becomes another excuse for Elsa to do some again. And it's just kind of macabre that they're basically being intimate in a gravesite. And that's after burying somebody. So that same night that this is happening, you see Detective Mitchner and Detective Vega having a stakeout, finding and looking for the Zoot Suiters, the people that were involved with the murder of Officer Riley. And at this time, as we well aware, is that Detective Vega doesn't know Mateo is involved in this murder. So one of the things Detective Mitchner says to Detective Vega, which they allow Mexican kids to ride in the middle of the night, their bicycles. And as a kid rides bike, he has to be about maybe no older than 10 years old. He takes a look at the vehicle that they're sitting in and realizes they're cops. And the expression on the kid's face just widens up and just starts heading towards Rico's apartment, almost to let him know, hey, the cops are staking out your apartment. A chase ensues, right? They go after that kid so he wouldn't be able to warn them. They break down Fly Rico's apartment. A chase ensues, and one Detective Vega confronts Mateo after a long chase, dialogue exchange, and Mateo is defiant and says he would kill Officer Riley again. At this point, Detective Vega doesn't know why. The sirens are coming as backup, and it cuts with Detective Vega telling his brother to run, because the only thing Detective Vega was doing was aiming a gun ready to shoot because he wouldn't stop. So he's obviously, there's a dilemma in it within Detective Vega. What does he do? He's conflicted. Do I arrest my brother? Do I shoot him? Do I let him go? And he lets him go. Obviously, it wasn't the right thing to do. Like I said, he's a very conflicted individual, and we'll see what ends up happening with that. So So my final thoughts and review of episode 5, Children of the Royal Sun, is this show builds up, and I find it very interesting, the storylines and the plots, the twists and the turns. I love personally all the conjecture that's kind of involved in the storytelling, and to me that makes for good storytelling, because just not hitting over your head with this would happen, this would happen. You have to kind of piece everything together, and so there's a lot of allegorical things going on. Um, the two things that I had problem with this particular episode, I really thought it was going to heighten, the story arc was going to take peak at this point, and it really didn't. So that was a little disappointing. But this whole series overall, it's just top notch, from the production to the acting to the writing. The 2 points that I would point out was it was a little kind of went off track for me. I like for them to stick with the main points. I know they have to get to a place and they have to involve all the story plots they kind of threw at us in the first episode. They have to kind of delve into that a little bit, but it seems slow this episode. I thought it was going to go in a totally faster pace and different direction. It didn't. The other point, knowing the culture of the Zoot Suiters or the Pachucos, that type of thing, interaction, like a threesome between Fly Rico, Mateo, and Rio would take place, because that culture is steep in machismo, as well as something frowning from that aspect of a lifestyle. To say that that never happened, I'm not saying that. Obviously, but they're living in a different time. They're living in 1938 America. Here we have Councilman Townsend, who's hid his proclivities for probably as long as he lived. And you have this situation where we have Rio manipulating that situation and kind of brought in Fly Rico and Mateo into this deviant world, and maybe creating deviant acts in terms of how we see society in 1938. Having said that, I love this episode. I can't wait to episode 6. And for those of you, I encourage you to watch Penny Dreadful City of Angels. And again, Showtime has a 30-day free trial, and I would encourage you to do that. Stay tuned for episode 6. One last thing, don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep it here on Zenny62.